Hello? Oh, there we go. Can you hear me? Oh, thank goodness. I have no idea what was going on, but for some reason my mic had changed all of a sudden, but I don't remember adjusting it at all. That's so weird. Ooh, I'm kind of big. Ooh, there we are. Why do I look so foggy? Okay. So how has everyone been? I'm so sorry for the confusion. I have no idea why it was being like that. Now I also don't know why I am so blurry. I swear, being a unicorn is so difficult. Technology never wants to work for you. Maybe it's... Let's try all this again. I'm going to remain blurry. Okay, I guess it wants me to do this. I wonder why my settings got so all out of whack. I haven't done anything. Some phantom must be messing with your settings. I have no idea why this happens. It's so confusing. I haven't adjusted or altered my settings since the last stream of last week. And the only thing I did then was up my volume so that it wasn't so ASMR-ish for a game stream. But oh well. There we are. Well, I'm here now. I've fixed it. At least I hope I've done. How can you hear me, my dear? Does everything sound okay? Hello, Armored Horns. I figured it out. Volume is good? Sounds good? That's perfect. Alright, now I just need to get my tome of a book here. Thank you all so much for your patience. I'm so sorry. Let me put on some mood music for y'all. Don't sweat it, tech problems are random. Yes, especially if you're a unicorn. But without much further ado, I shall read to y'all some Irish myths and fairy tales. Our next story is The Two Gossips, attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. At Menan, near Tracton, there was a fine couple whose name was Mar Daniel, and they had such a fine, wholesome-looking child that the fairies determined on having it in their company, and putting a changeling in its place. But it so happened that Miss MacDaniel had a gossip whose name was Nora Buckley, and she was going by the house they lived in. It was a nice, new slated one, by the same token. Just coming on the dusk of the evening, she thought it too late to step in and ask how her gossip was, as she had above 1.5 miles further to go. And moreover, she knew the fairies were abroad, for all along the road before her from Carrickline, one eddy of dust would be followed by another, which was a plain sign on the good people were out taking their rounds. And she had pains in her bones with dropping so many courtesies. And how is everything sounding so far for y'all, my dears? However, Nora Buckley, when she came opposite her gossip's house, stopped short, and made another, and said, almost under her breath, "God keep all here from harm." No sooner had these words been uttered than she saw one of the windows lifted up, and her gossip's beautiful child, without any more to do, handed out. She could not tell if her life depended on it, how or by whom. No matter for that. She went to the window and took the child from whatever handed it to her, and covered it up well in her cloak, and carried it away home with her. Next morning early, she went over to see her gossip, who began to make a great moan to her of how different her child was from what it had ever been before, crying all the night and keeping her awake, and how nothing she could think of would quiet it. "I'll tell you what you'll do with the brat," said Nora Buckley, looking as if knowing as if she knew more than all the rest of the world. "Whip it well first, and then bring it to the crossroads, and leave the fairy in the ditch there for any one to take that pleases. for I have your own child at home, safe and sound, as he was handed out of the window last night to me." Miss McDaniel, on hearing this, when the surprise was over, stepped out to get a rod, and her gossip, happening for one instant to look after her, on turning round again, found the fairy gone, and neither she nor the child's mother saw any more of it, nor could ever hear a word of tidings on how it disappeared in a so wonderful manner. Miss McDaniel went over with great speed to her gossip's house, and then she got her own child and brought him back with her, and a stout young man he is at this day. So to save the kidnapping, she kidnapped. This next story seems to be a collection of stanzas, and the story is called The Stolen Child, attributed to W.B. Yeats. Armored Horns, are you okay? Where was I? I'd like to know if you have any other stories about Kukulahan and other stories related to such heroes. For the future, not now. So, the storybook that I'm reading right now is a big collage of all different types of fairies. Let me see. So in the future, there is a small section in regards to Tirnanog. So maybe, giants, rock stones, treasure lands, legends of the Western Islands, kings, queen, princes, earls, and robbers. So, if it's not within this book, I'm sure I have other legend books that I would be able to read to y'all with stories about those such heroes. Let's see. Because right now I am within Changelings, within the subsection of popular notions considering the sea race. Up next there is the Marrow, before we get into the larger section of the solitary fairies. Thank you for telling me. Well, of course, my dear. I have more than enough books about myths and legends. I should be able to satisfy your urge for such things. Within one of them, at least. Now, back to The Stolen Child by W.B. Yeats. Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuth Wood in the lake, there lies a leafy island where flapping herons wake. The drowsy water rats, there we've hid our fairy bats, full of berries and of reddest stolen cherries. Come away, O human child, to the woods and the waters wild, with the fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wave of moonlight glosses the dim gray sands with light, far off by the furthest Rosses, we foot it all the night, weaving olden dances, mingling hands and mingling glances, till the moon has taken flight. To and fro we leap, and chase the frothy bubbles, while the world is full of troubles, and is anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with the fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wandering water gushes from the hills above Glencar, in the pool among the rushes that scarce could bathe a star, we seek for slumbering trout, and whispering in their ears, we give them evil dreams, leaning softly out. From ferns that drop their tears of dew on the young streams, come, O human child, with the fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Away with us he's going, the solemn-eyed, he'll hear no more the lowing of the calves on the warm hillsides, or the kettle on the hob sing peace into his breast, or see the brown mice bob round and round the oatmeal chest. For he comes, the human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than he can understand. Our next story is The Fairy Changeling, attributed to Lady Wilde. One evening, a man was coming home late, and he passed a house where two women stood by the window, talking. "I have left the dead child in the cradle as you bid me," said one woman, "and behold, here is the other child. Take it and let me go." And she laid down an infant on a sheet by the window, who seemed in a secret sleep, and it was draped all in white. "Wait," said the other, "till you have found some food, and then take it to the Fairy Queen, as I promised, in place of the dead child that we have laid in the cradle by the nurse. Wait also till the moon rises, and then you shall have the payment which I've promised." And then they both turned from the window, Now the man saw that there was some devil's magic in it all, and when the woman turned away, he crept up close to the open window. He put his hand in and seized the sleeping child and drew it out quietly without ever a sound. Then he made off as fast as he could into his own home. Before the woman could know anything about it, and handed the child to his mother's care. Now the mother was angry at first, but when he told her the story, she believed him and put the baby to sleep. A lovely, beautiful boy with a face like an angel. The next morning, there was a great commotion in the village, for the news spread that the firstborn son of the great lord of the place, a lovely, healthy child, died suddenly in the night, without ever having a sign of sickness. When they looked at him in the morning, there he lay dead in his cradle, and he was shrunk and wizened like an old man, and no beauty was seen on him any more. So great lamentation was heard on all sides, and the whole country gathered to the wake. Amongst them came the young man who had carried off the child, and when he looked on the little wizened thing in the cradle, he laughed. Now the parents were angry at his laughter and wanted to turn him out. But he said, "Wait, put down a good fire," and they did so. Then he went over to the cradle and said to the hideous little creature in a loud voice before all the people, "If you don't rise up this minute and leave this place, I will burn you on the fire, for I know right well who you are and where you came from." At once the child sat up and began to grin at him, and made a rush to the door to get away. But the man caught hold of it and threw it on the fire, and the moment it felt the heat, it turned into a black kitten, and flew up the chimney and was seen no more. Then the man sent word to his mother to bring the other child, who was found to be the true heir, the Lord's own son. So there was great rejoicing, and the child grew up to be a great lord himself. And when his time came, he ruled well over the estate, and his descendants are living to this day, for all things prospered with him after he was saved from the fairies. The next story is called The Town Shiog, attributed to Patrick Kennedy. In the pleasant valley of the Duffery, sheltered from the northwest winds by the huge pile of Mount Leinster, lie two villages separated by a turf bog. The western cluster is called Kennystown, and the eastern Tobanstown. The extensive rath of Camoge commands the bog on the north, and that overabounding moisture in the halls and drains finds its way to the noisy glacier in the south. Yes, armored horns. Many of the stories involving the changelings can be thought of as the elder inhabitants of these villages spoke the Irish tongue at the close of the last century and the beginning of this. About the year 1809, the inhabitants of the whole valley spent a Sunday afternoon on the dry tussocks of the bog, sounding the dark pools with long poles and fishing spears to stir up a decadent of serpent that had laid the country waste in the days of Brian Bromley. Some intelligent person had seen it lying on the surface of Lona Pista, about half a mile off, a day or two before, and a still more intelligent person had seen it tearing across the intermediate fields on Saturday night, with sparks of fire flashing from its tail. If the young Piast was at the bottom of the bog hole, he remained there quietly enough. The enthusiastic crowd was obliged to separate at nightfall, no incident having rewarded their expectations beyond the fall of a little boy into the turf pool, his rescue, and consequent punishment by a loving but irritable parent. This, however, is no better than a discretion. Caddy Clark of Tobinstown was once happy in the possession of a fine boy, the delight of her eyes and heart, till one unlucky day, when she happened to sleep too long in the morning, and consequently had not time to say her prayers, Mr. Clark, coming in from the fields, was annoyed at not finding the stirabout ready, and opened his mind on the subject. Caddy was vexed with him and herself, and cursed a little, as was customary 60 years since among men and women in remote districts of our country. All these annoyances prevented her from remembering the holy water, and from sprinkling some drops on her little son, and making the sign of the cross on his innocent forehead. When the men and boys left the house for their outdoor work after breakfast, Caddy took her pailful of soiled linen to the spot where the stream formed a little pool, and where the villagers had fixed a broad and flat bettling stone. While she was employed in cleaning the clothes, she let her child sit or roll on the grassy slope behind her. All at once, she heard a scream from the boy, and when she turned and ran to him, she found him in convulsions. She ran home with him, and ministered salt and water, and the other specifics popular in the country. The fit passed away, but she was grieved to perceive that the weazened, pained expression still remained on his face, and that his whimpering and whining did not abate. In fact, to use a well-worn Irish expression, the cry was never out of his mouth. He ate as much as would suffice a full-grown man, and was always ready for food, both at regular meal times and between them. After a week of this state of things, the neighbors came to the conclusion that it was a siho that Kathy was slaving her life out for. Katty's family came into the same persuasion, and lastly, though with some doubts, Katty herself. As a family and neighborly council held round the fire, after the children had been sent to bed, they proceeded to get rid of the little wretch, and this was the order of the ceremonial. The neighbor took the shovel, rubbed it clean, laid it on the floor, and his wife, seizing on the supposed fairy, placed it sitting on the broad iron blade. Ugh. She held it there stoutly, notwithstanding its howls, while her husband, raising it gently, proceeded to the barn, accompanied by the assembly, and, despite all opposition on its part, placed it on a wisp of straw which crowned the manure heap. The luxury of the seat did not succeed in arresting his outcries, but his audience did not take much notice, joined hands, and in their own parlance serenaded the crowned heap 3 times, while the ferryman, who had been summoned from Barnyard or High Court, recited an incantation in Irish, of which we gave the literal version. Come to our call, O sicky mother, come and remove your offspring. Food and drink he has received, and kindness from the bonne or woman of the house. Here he shall no longer stay, but depart to Doom Matha. Restore the lost child, O being's key, and food shall be left for thy people. When the cloth is spread on the harvest field, on the short grass newly mown, food shall be left on the dresser shelf, and the hearthstone shall be clean. When the Clancy comes in crowds, and sweep in rings round the poor, and hold their feast at the fire, restore the mortal child, O beings he, and receive thine at your own hands. Ah, thank you for following me. Apology? That was so very kind of you, my dear. The charm and the 3rd round ending at the same time, all re-entered the house and closed the door. As soon they felt the air around them sweep this way and that, as if stirred by the motion of wings. But they remained quiet and silent for about 10 minutes. Opening the door, they then looked out and saw the bundle on the straw on the heap, but neither child nor fairy. Go into your bedroom, Katty, said the ferryman, and see if there's anything left on the bed. She did so, and they soon heard a cry of joy, and Caddy was among them in a moment, kissing and hugging her own healthy-looking child, who was waking and rubbing his eyes, and wondering at the lights and all the eager faces. Whatever hurry Caddy might be in the morning after that, she never left her bedside till she had finished, as devoutly as she could, her 5 paters and 5 aves, and her Apostles' Creed and her Confiteor, and she never cursed or swore, except when she was surprised by a sudden fit of passions. Don't you just love how much Catholicism, or just Christianity in general, is woven within these stories? I do always want to hunt down as close to the originals as possible, and I do have one storybook that seems to have tried to do this. Ah, hello Looney Neptune. Thank you so much for popping in. Give me 1 second. I think I just noticed something. How is that? I think I just realized that. In the confusion of me trying to figure out what was wrong with my microphone, I accidentally connected it to my webcam instead of my actual microphone. I'm so sorry about that. I hope the audio is better now. But that still doesn't explain why it was wrong in the first place. Oh well. Our next story is The Young Piper, attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. There lived not since on the borders of the county Tipperary, a decent, honest couple, whose names were Mick Flanagan and Judy Muldoon. These poor people were blessed, as the saying is, with 4 children, all boys. 3 of them were fine, stout, healthy, good-looking children as ever the sun shone upon, and it was enough to make any Irishman proud of the breed of his countrymen to see them about at 1 o'clock on a fine summer's day, standing at their father's cabin door, with their beautiful flaxen hair hanging in curls round their heads, and their cheeks like 2 rosy apples, and a big, laughing potato smoking in their hand. A proud man was Mick of these fine children, and a proud woman too was Judy. Reason enough they had to be so. But it was far otherwise with the remaining one, which was the 3rd eldest. for he was the most miserable, ill-contented, ugly brat that ever God put life into. He was so ill-thriven that he never was able to stand alone or to leave his cradle. He had long, shaggy, matted curly hair, as black as any raven. His face was of a greenish-yellow color. His eyes were like two burning coals, and were forever moving in his head, as if they had a perpetual motion. Before he was a 12-month-old, he had a mouth full of great teeth, and his hands were like cat's claws, and his legs were no thicker than the handle of a whip, and about as straight as a reaping hook. To make the matter worse, he had the gut of a cormorant, and the whinge and the whelp and the screech and the yowl was never out of his mouth. The neighbors all suspected that he was something not right, particularly as it was observed when people, as they do in the country, got about the fire and began to talk of religion and good things. The brat, as he lay in the cradle, which his mother generally put near the fireplace that he might be snug, used to sit up as they were in the middle of their talk, and began to bellow as if the devil was in him in right earnest. This, as I said, led the neighbors to think that not all was right, and there was a general consultation about one day about what would be the best to do with him. Some advised to put him out on the shovel, but Judy's pride was up at that. A pretty thing indeed, that a child of hers should be put on the shovel and flung out on the dunghill, just like a dead kitten or a poisoned rat. No, no, she would not hear to that at all. One old woman, who was considered very skillful and knowing in fairy matters, strongly recommended her to put the tongs in the fire and heat them red hot, and to take his nose in them, and that they would, beyond all matter of a doubt, make him tell what he was and where he came from. For the general suspicion was that he had been changed by the good people. But Judy was too soft-hearted and too fond of the imp, so she would not give in to this plan, though everybody said she was wrong, and maybe she was, but it's hard to blame a mother. Well, some advised one thing and some another, and at last one spoke of sending a priest, who was a very holy and learned man, to see it. To this Judy, of course, had no objection, but one thing or another always prevented her from doing so, and the upshot of the business was that the priest never saw him. Things went on in the old way for some time longer. The brat continued yelping and howling, and eating more than his 3 brothers put together, and playing all sorts of unlucky tricks, for he was mighty mischievously inclined. Till it happened that one day that Tim Carroll, the blind piper, going his rounds, crawled in and sat down by the fire to have a bit of a chat with the woman of the house. So after some time, Tim, who was no curl of his music, yoked on the pipes, and began to bellows away in high style. When the instant he began, the young fellow, who had been lying as still as a mouse in his cradle, sat up and began to grin and twist his ugly face, to swing about his long tawny arms, and to kick out his crooked legs, and to show signs of great glee at the music. At last nothing would serve him but he should get the pipes into his own hands, and to humor him, the mother asked Tim to lend them to the child for the minute. Tim, who was kind to children, readily consented, and as Tim had not his sight, Judy herself brought them to the cradle, and went to put them on him. But she had no occasion, for the youth seemed quite up to the business. He buckled the pipes, set the bellows under one arm, and the bag under the other, and worked them both as knowingly as if he had been 20 years at the business, and lilted up Sheila Nagira in the finest style imaginable. All was in astonishment. The poor woman crossed herself. Tim, who I had said before was dark, did not know well who was playing, was in great delight, and when he heard that it was the little Chrétien, not 5 years old, that had never seen a set of pipes in his life, he wished the mother joy of her son, offered to take him off her hands if she would part with him, swore he was a born piper, a natural genius, and declared that in a little time more, with the help of good instruction from himself, there would not be his match in the whole country. The poor woman was greatly delighted to hear all this, particularly that, as what Tim said about natural genius quieted some misgivings that were rising in her mind, lest what the neighbors said about his not being right might be too true. And it gratified her, moreover, to think that her dear child, for she really loved the whelp, would not be forced to turn out and beg, but might earn decent bread for himself. So when Mick came home in the evening from his work, she up and told him all that what had happened, and all that Tim Carroll had said, and Mick, as was natural, was very glad to hear it, for the helpless condition of the poor creature was a great trouble to him. So the next day he took a pig to the fair, and with what is brought set off to Clonmel, and bestowed a brand new set of pipes for the proper size of him. In about a fortnight the pipes came home, and the moment the chap in his cradle laid eyes on them, he squealed in delight, and threw up his pretty legs, and bumped himself in the cradle, and went on with a great many comical tricks, till at last, to quiet him, they gave him the pipes, and he immediately set to and ploughed away at jig paltog, to the admiration of all that heard him. The fame of his skill on the pipes soon spread far and near, for there was not a piper in the next 6 counties could not hear him. In old Madarahiru, or the hare in the corn, or the fox hunter jig, or the rakes of Cashel, or the piper's maggot, or any of the fine Irish digs, which made people dance whenever they will or no. It was surprising to hear him rattle away the fox hunt. You'd really think you heard the hounds giving tongue, and the terriers yelping from behind, and the huntsmen and the whippers in the hunt itself. The best of him was, he was no way stingy of his music, and many a merry dance the boys and girls of the neighborhood used to have in his father's cabin, and he would play up music for all of them, that they said used as it were to put quicksilver in their feet, and they all declared they had never moved so light and so airy to any piper's playing than ever they danced to. But besides all his fine Irish music, he had one queer tune of his own, the oddest that was ever heard. For the moment he began to play it, everything in the house seemed disposed to dance. The plates and the porringers used to jingle on the dresser. The pots and the pothooks used to rattle in the chimney, and the people used to even fancy they felt the stools moving from under them. But, however it might be with the stools, it was certain that no one could keep long sitting in them, for both old and young always fell to the capering as hard as ever they could. The girls complained that when he began its tune, it always threw them out in their dancing, and that they could never handle their feet rightly, for they felt the floor like ice under them, and themselves every moment ready to come sprawling on their backs or their faces. The young bachelors that wished to show off their dancing and their new pumps, and their bright red or green or yellow garters, swore that it confused them so that they could never go rightly through the heel toe, or cover the buckle, or any of their best steps, but felt themselves always all bedizzied and bewildered, and then old and young would go jostling and knocking together in a frightful manner. And when the unlucky brats had them all in this way whirligigging about the floor, he'd grin and chuckle and chatter, for all the world like Jacko the monkey when he was played off some of his roguery. The older he grew, the worse he grew, and by the time he was 6 years old, there was no standing the house for him, for he was always making his brothers burn or scald themselves, or break their shins over the pots and stools. One time in harvest, he was left at home by himself, and when his mother came in, she found the cat a horseback on the dog, and with her face to the tail, and her legs tied round him, and the urchin playing his queer tune to them, so that the dog went barking and jumping about, and the puss was mewing for the dear life, the slapping her tail backwards and forwards, which would hit against the dog's chaps. He'd snap and bite, and then there was the filloon, Another time, the farmer Mick worked with, a very decent, respectable man, happened to call in, and Judy wiped the stool with her apron and invited him to sit down and rest himself after his walk. He was sitting with his back to the cradle, and began him what was a pan of blood, and behind him was a pan of blood, for Judy was making pig's pudding. The lad lay quiet still in his rest, and watched his opportunity till he got ready a hook at the end of a piece of twine, which he contrived to fling so handily that it caught in the bob of a man's nice new wig, and soused it in the pan of blood. Another time his mother was coming in from milking the cow, with the pail on her head. The minute he saw her, he lilted up his infernal tune, and the poor woman, letting go of the pail, clapped her hands aside and began to dance a dig, and tumbled the milk all atop her husband, who was bringing in some turf to boil the supper. In short, there would be no end to telling all of his pranks and all of the mischievous tricks he played. Hydration break. Soon after, some mischances began to happen to the farmer's cattle. The horse took the staggers, a fine veal calf died of the black leg, and some of his sheep of the red water. The cows began to grow vicious and to kick down the milk pails, and the roof on one end of the barn fell in, and the farmer took it into his head that Mick Flanagan's unlucky child was the cause of all the mischief. So one day he called Mick aside and said to him, "Mick, you see things are not going on with me as they ought, and to be plain with you, Mick, I think that child of yours is the cause of it. I am really falling away to nothing with the fretting, and I can hardly sleep on my bed at night for thinking of what may happen before the morning. I'd be so glad if you'd look out for work somewhere else. You're as a good man as many in the country, and there's no fear but you'll have your choice of work." To this Mick replied that he is sorry for his losses, and still sorrier that he or his should be thought to be the cause of them, for, of his own part, he was not quite easy in his mind about that child, but he had him, and so must keep him, and he promised to look out for another place immediately. Accordingly, next Sunday, at chapel, Mick gave out that he was about leaving the work at John Riordan's, and immediately a farmer, who lived a couple miles off, who wanted a ploughman, the last one having just left him, came up to Mick and offered him a house and a garden, and work all the year round. Mick, who knew him to be a good employer, immediately closed with him, So it was agreed that the farmer should send a cart to take his little bit of furniture, and that he should remove on the following Thursday. When Thursday came, the cart came, according to promise, and Mick loaded it, and put the cradle with the child and his pipes on top, and Judy sat beside it to take care of him, lest he should tumble out and be killed. They drove the cow before them, the dog followed, but the cat of course was left behind, and the other 3 children went along the road picking skihories and blackberries, for it was a fine day towards the latter end of the harvest. They had to cross a river, but as it ran through the bottom between 2 high banks, you did not see it till you were close on it. The young fellow was lying pretty quiet in the bottom of his cradle till they came to the head of the bridge, and when hearing the roaring of the water, for there was a great flood in the river, as it rained heavily for the last 2 or 3 days, he sat up in his cradle and looked about him, and the instant he got a sight of the water, and found that they were going to go across it, oh, how did he bellow, and how did he squeal! No rat caught in a snap trap ever sang out equal to him. "Wisht, Alana," said Judy, "there's no fear of you. Sure it's only over the stone bridge we're going." "Bad luck to you, you old rip," cried he. "What a pretty trick you've played me to bring me here," and still went on yelling, and the further they got on the bridge the louder he yelled, till at last Mick could not hold out no longer. So, giving him a great skrelp with the whip he had in his hand, "Devil choke you, you brat," said he. "Will you never stop bawling? A body can't hear you for ears around you." A body can't hear their ears for you. The moment he felt the tongue of the whip, he leapt up in the cradle, clapped the pipes under his arm, and gave the most wicked grin at Mick, and jumped clean over the battlements of the bridge down into the water. "Oh, my child," shouted Judy. "He's gone forever from me." Mick and the rest of the children ran to the other side of the bridge, and looking over, they saw him coming out from under the arch of the bridge, sitting cross-legged on the top of a white-headed wave, and playing away on the pipes as merrily as if nothing had happened. The river was running very rapidly, so he was whirled away at great rate, but he played as fast, aye, and faster than the river ran, and though they set off as hard as they could along the bank, yet as the river made a sudden turn round the hill, about 100 yards below the bridge, by the time they got there he was out of sight, and no one ever laid eyes on him more. But the general opinion was that he went home with the pipes to his own relations, the good people, to make music for them. Quite interesting. Generally, in the stories, you hear of the mortal child being returned to the family. How interesting. But that was if the child was truly taken from them, and that this child was not simply special within his own right, I do believe that I shall call it there for tonight, for we now begin a whole new genre of stories. We have finished up the changelings, and now we will begin the marrow next week. But what a wonderful little bit of stories about kidnapping and Christian sensibilities, I suppose you could say. Now, let me see if I have a friend or companion who is streaming this day. Hmm. Ah, so I see that Chirpy Burby is doing some art at this time. Let us go say hello to her. She is a talented artist, and I've happily commissioned her a couple times before. Thank you all so much for joining me today. It truly is an honor that you would come to me and spend time here with me. You could be anywhere else in the world today, but you chose to be read to stories by me. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. Oh, hello Skullbreaker 361. Thank you for coming in. Although I will say that you've come right at the end of the stream, I'm afraid. I was... Well, thank you so much for the follow, my dear. And I'm so sorry that I'm ending for today, right as you join in. I will let you know that I will be streaming tomorrow at 5 p.m. CST. But if you wish, there's always the VOD, so that you can watch and get the same relaxation. I'm glad I met you now. Well, thank you, my dear. That's so sweet of you to say. But there's always the VODs, where you can watch any stream that you may have missed. I do also have my YouTube channel, where I upload all of my VODs. But thank you all so much for joining me today, and we shall go raid my very artistically gifted friend, Chirpy Burby. I hope you all had a wonderful day here with me today, and I hope that my voice might have brought you some relaxation. I hope you have a great night tonight. Well, thank you, Skullbreaker. That's so sweet of you to say. But let us raid my friend, and let us dazzle her with our glimmer. And I hope to see you all tomorrow. But until then, ta-ta, and sleep well, my dears.